Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the Prime Minister tells the Conservative conference the threat of nationalism was set back at the election. Also, completely unacceptable and inhumane, the damning verdict on the care of a man who killed himself 2 days after being discharged from a psychiatric hospital. Meet the man who can't sit up because his spinal fluid may leak.
It's been life-changing. It's destroyed social life, it's affected my friendships, it's ended my career, my job.
Also on the programme, facing jail in Dubai over a forged banknote, this man is now on his way home. And how long is long enough to cross the road? Calls for more of the little green man. Good evening. The Prime Minister's rallying call to Scotland's Conservatives was overshadowed by a conference speech in which she was interrupted by a demonstrator and suffered a coughing fit. Theresa May said the threat of nationalism had been set back by the general election result in Scotland. Our political correspondent Nick Hurdley watched the eventful speech.
Another crucial day.
Is this a make-or-break speech, Prime Minister?
A Prime Minister struggling to assert her authority. Secretary of State, is this a make-or-break speech for the Prime Minister?
It's an important speech where the Prime Minister's got the opportunity, having set out her vision for Brexit, to set out what she thinks in relation to the day-to-day important issues for people in this country.
But this wasn't the script she was hoping to follow.
Boris asked me to give...
Handed a P45 by a comedian, a moment that's likely to haunt Theresa May.
Some people say we've spent too much time.
And a coughing fit.
Oh, excuse me.
She might not be popular with everyone here after the election result, but they bought her some time. Often not easy to watch. At times it felt like everything that could go wrong did. Keep an eye on the F. But important politics too. A bill to cap energy prices, a pledge will leave the EU in March 2019, and optimism, particularly on her vision of the UK.
I take comfort that the general election saw the threat of nationalism set back. The case for a second referendum in Scotland denied.
She praised Ruth Davidson's leadership, adding,
So we must unite the country around our Conservative vision of a global, prosperous Britain in which the British dream is alive.
Applause for Theresa May in here, but that was one of the most extraordinary moments in recent political history. If it was a make-or-break moment, it didn't go according to plan. She now has to hope that coughing through that speech doesn't become a metaphor for her leadership. Afterwards, words of support.
I think she had a bit of a cough, that's fine, she pushed all the way through it, and I think that shows the strength and resolve to push all the way through.
If ever there's a metaphor for battling through and service and duty, the Prime Minister just gave us it right there.
Theresa May knows more than most how cruel political luck can be, but sympathy isn't something Prime Ministers can rely on. She'll hope her message still gets through. Nick Hurdley reporting Scotland at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester.
Well, let's go now to our political editor, Brian Taylor. Brian, you've seen many leaders' conference speeches. What's your assessment of this one?
It was calamitous. She needed a triumph, she got a disaster. She needed easy, fluent eloquence, and she could scarcely get her words out past an apparent pond full of frogs in her throat. And then there was a demonstrator, and then bits of the set started to fall to bits. It was impossible not to feel huge sympathy for her as a human being, standing there and palpably struggling with the situation. But there comes a moment for anyone in a situation like that where compassion begins to slip into pity, and that's not a particularly good mood or a good emotion for a Prime Minister, or at least for one that hopes to stay in office.
And Brian, regarding the content of the speech, the nationalists here, the SNP, will of course disagree that nationalism was set back at the general election.
They will, and they will have the chance to say so when the SNP conference opens on Sunday. They will argue that, yes, they had some setbacks as they would see it in the UK general election, but I believe that Nicola Sturgeon will stress at her conference that the idea, the aim of independence is very, very much still at the top of their list of objectives, while of course they will stress that they are getting on with the day job, so to speak, here at Holyrood. I expect a very firm rebuttal of the arguments advanced by the Prime Minister today.
Brian, thank you. Completely unacceptable and inhumane. That's the damning verdict of Scotland's mental health watchdog on the treatment of a man given a copy of the Yellow Pages when he was discharged from hospital and told to find himself accommodation. Scotland's economy slowed in the second quarter of this year following a strong start to 2017. That performance, though, wasn't sustained, and growth between April and June was just 0.1%. The Fraser of Allender economic think tank says these latest figures show how fragile Scotland's economy is, and that over the year it has grown at around a third of the equivalent UK rate. A man who has to spend most of his life lying flat because of a serious brain condition has begun a campaign to publicise his illness and fight for better treatment. The Health Secretary has requested an investigation into the current practices of health boards to ensure they're meeting the needs of women who experience a miscarriage. It comes after the case of a woman was raised at a meeting of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. It was claimed she had to wait 5 weeks for a surgical procedure. Well, Katrina Renton is in our newsroom and can tell us some more. Katrina.
Well, Jackie, the issue was raised at NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's annual review meeting earlier this week, where it was claimed the woman was sent away from hospital with surgery scheduled for 5 weeks' time. Now, while she was waiting, it is said she hemorrhaged and had to be admitted to hospital as an emergency. Today, the Health Secretary said the initial indications from the Health Board are that this is an isolated case, but said it is totally unacceptable for a woman to have to wait this long for surgery after pregnancy loss. Now, she has asked the Chief Medical Officer to investigate the current practice of health boards across Scotland.
I will be looking very closely at the data that's provided to the health boards. If women are waiting or options are not available, then we will be going back to health boards to ask them to change their processes to make sure that at this distressing time, length of delay is not adding to women and their families' sadness and distress at this time.
NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde said the current standard within the Health Board is that women experiencing a miscarriage who choose surgical management are offered this within a 2-week time frame. It said the case raised here was of one individual patient who waited longer than the current standard. Now, I've spoken to the person who raised the issue at the meeting on behalf of her friend. She's a member of SANDS, the Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Charity. She told the meeting 5-week waiting times for the procedure were becoming normal. According to the latest figures, women suffered more than 4,600 miscarriages in Scotland last year. Jackie.
A driver who was texting on his phone moments before he killed a 2-year-old girl has been jailed for 6 years. A time bar which prevented victims of child abuse seeking civil legal action has been lifted. Researchers say there's been a huge drop in the number of young women showing early signs of potential cervical cancer since a school vaccination programme was introduced. A study of women who'd been referred for further tests following an abnormal smear found that there was a reduction of 41% after the introduction of the human papillomavirus vaccination in 2008. Researchers at Aberdeen University previously estimated it would take several decades to see the benefits of the programme. An Edinburgh man detained in Dubai over a forged banknote and who was facing up to a year in jail is due to fly home tomorrow. How long is long enough to cross the road? Well, now, it's a must-win World Cup qualifier. A sporting event in which golf meets show business starts tomorrow too. The Dunhill Links Championship attracts celebrity players as well as some of the world's top professionals. Now, a reminder of tonight's main news. Theresa May's speech to the Conservative Party conference turned into something of an ordeal as she struggled to speak through a cough and a demonstrator. And that's Reporting Scotland.